Hi guys, it's Kelly Lativola here and I'm back with another video for WPlus9. Today's card is going to be featuring some no-line coloring, which I'm basically terrified of. But every once in a while I do push myself to give it a try again in the hopes that, practice will make me more comfortable and I will get better at it. Today I'm going to be using the Onward and Upward stamps and dies, and then also the Modern Roses. These also have dies, but I'm not going to be using those today. And then I did not show you the Stitched Ironworks background, and I did end up using that. It's a beautiful A2 like full panel background. So here what I'm doing is I laid down the die because I was trying to get my placement, so I just traced around it, and then I'm going to stamp my sentiment inside. This is the original sentiment that I was going to use. You're going to see that we're going to switch this up so much. But I'm also stamping in the same color my roses. And then I am going to do a little bit of masking just because I honestly thought it was going to be a one layer card. That's not the way that it turned up. And sometimes it's okay. You can just embrace it. But as far as my arrangement was going, when you want to frame something with florals or just really anything, symmetry is the easiest way to do it, and that's kind of my go-to. So you can see I will stamp one flower, and then on the exact opposite side I will stamp the same flower. That way the design is completely symmetrical. I did have to do a little bit of masking. Like I said, I thought it was going to be a one layer card, and I was trying to create why can't I speak create like this swag of flowers on both sides. So I masked it, stamped my, smaller rosebud, and then moved that mask to the other side, stamped the smaller rosebud again. And then I'm going to add in some leaves as well. So each side only has 2 flowers, but then it does have some extra leaves from that same set to kind of build it up and make it fuller. But I honestly, like in my head, my game plan was to stamp these down and then die cut that diamond. I'm sure there's another word for the shape that it is, but I cannot think of it. So it's the flat diamond. That's what I'm calling it because I don't know what it's really called. But anyway, so I was going to die cut it through the flowers and then pop it up. So it wasn't, I guess, really going to be a one layer card, but it just did not work out that way. I didn't, once I got all the coloring done, I just couldn't bring myself to cut through it. So for my flowers, even though purple is not my favorite, okay, it's just not. Yellow is probably my least favorite, but there is something about trying to, like I said earlier, switching things up and pushing outside of your comfort zone. So I decided that I was going to do the flowers purple. One of the wonderful things, even though a VO9 is super scary, one of the wonderful things about this color combination is typically it gives really great dimension. So I took my lightest color, which was a VO1, and then I filled in both of my flowers completely. So that way I had a good base coat. I knew that I wasn't going to have any white highlights on this, so I just went ahead and filled it in. I like to color starting at my lightest color, moving out to my darkest, from my darkest back in to my lightest. Now, I think a lot of people look at stamps that are drawn this way, that are, more elegant or have more detail, and then they get very... I think they get overwhelmed. And it doesn't have to be that way. And just like no line coloring kind of overwhelms me a little bit, like I like my black line, it's my little safety net. It does mean that it takes me longer. And this did take me quite a bit of time. And you can see me stopping to look at it to make sure that I'm adding the shading in the right direction. But sometimes learning something new is a little bit of a labor of love until you're doing it so often that you don't have to think about it, which is how black line copic coloring is for me now. Like I don't even have to really think about it. As I got more towards the center of the rose, what's going to keep your flower from looking like a blob is making sure that you have highlights and shadows. So those two things will separate your petals so that it doesn't look like you have just one blob flower. Now, a lot of times when I'm doing this, I still feel like it doesn't look as separate as I want it. It doesn't look as clean as I want it. And that's, up close and personal. So try to remember that when you're doing your coloring, you're the only person with your coloring 2 inches away from your face. Like, you're the only person who's scrutinizing it. Most people are just going to look at it, see how beautiful it is, and then, move on with their day. They're not going to look at each individual stroke that you put down with each individual marker. So as we get out to the darkest color, you can see there's still plenty of my light color on there. For the bigger petals, I am going to add a little bit more of the dark color. For the smaller petals, I'll keep it really just to a line or 1 or 2 flicks of color. And I know the VO9 is scary. It's one of the darkest colors in the Copic collection. However, you can see just by adding this little bit of VO9 that we've added, how much dimension it adds to this one flower. I mean, it adds just so much. And to separate those petals and to keep, like I said, those highlights, it's really what kind of makes the coloring. So even if you're scared, even if you're like, this is way too dark, just try adding a little line of it, just a little teeny tiny line, because I think that you'll see an immense difference in the final image if you just add a little bit of dark color. Not a lot. Okay, I know I'm heavy-handed, so I have to be careful. So when I tell you it's just a little teeny tiny bit, that's all you really need to add. It's just a little teeny tiny bit. So also while I'm coloring this, there are the way that the petals are drawn, there's some kind of like wavy areas, and I am accentuating those by doing a couple of little lines of color coming from the outside to give that petal some shape and some form, just to play up what's already there. I'm not creating my own. And then once I get out to my lightest color, I'm pretty much just going to flick that all over everything to just kind of blend everything in. And you'll be able to see from the left to the right the difference that shading makes. I am going to go ahead and show you the other flower here, just because it is different. It's a little bit bigger. It has some more layers in the middle. But this concept of what I just explained to you about the smaller flower is still exactly the same. Just, adding minimal shading of just a little line. If I only, if it's a smaller area, flicking out the color where maybe there is some bigger area, paying attention to the way that the petal is drawn, as far as direction of my strokes. And that's why you see me turn my paper so much, because it's more comfortable for me to flick away from myself. In the past, when I have tried to not turn the paper, when I've flicked away from myself and in other petals flicked towards myself, it's not comfortable for me, and I don't have as good as control over like where the flicks go, so it doesn't look great either. So I've just learned that I'm a paper turner, and I know that sometimes watching videos that can be a little bit challenging. But in order for me to get something that I am happy with, or me to get something that I am happy with giving somebody else, that's just kind of a necessary evil in my world. So getting into the center of this one, obviously because this flower is more open, it's more, the bloom is bigger, there are more areas in which there's just tiny shading, which is totally okay. Just little lines of color, that's all I'm doing. I'm not flicking at all. Little lines of color, and maintain that highlight, because remember, that's what creates the separation from petal to petal, so it isn't just one blob on the paper. So I don't think I mentioned it. I love these modern roses. They're amazing, but I love everything in the modern flower series. So up until this point, I think we have petunias, calla lilies, is there anemones? I think there's anemones. There's a bunch of them that Dawn has drawn, and every single one that comes out I totally love, because I love flowers. So that's just something, if you have not seen these before, there's a whole nother part of the series to go check out on the website. So as far as, like, I don't know, personally, my craft room, Eric and I went up to the lake house, and we left on Friday and then came home late Saturday night. And when I came in, you bring all the stuff in, check out the house, that whole deal. And my craft room smelled like sauerkraut. I'm not making that up. It smelled like sauerkraut. And I was like, what is that smell? What is that? I mean, if you have children or animals, or maybe somebody's forgotten to take the garbage out, like that, that's the worst feeling ever. When you come into your house and you're like, random smell of which I have no idea where it's coming from. Ugh. So gross. So we put everything else away, and then I'm investigating because it's in my craft room. I'm in here all the time, just breathing the sauerkraut. And so I looked, through everything, thought maybe Peanut had thrown like a wrapper away or something like that, though I don't know what he would have been eating that would have smelled like sauerkraut. But nonetheless, I don't find anything. There's no like random like coffee cups in the corner. There's nothing. So I bring my Scentsy pot into the craft room, and I pick one of the really, really strong smells, like super strong smells. I think the one that I picked was salted popcorn. It just seems like anything that smells like coffee or caramel and Scentsy is just really strong. But anyway, that wouldn't even cover it up. So then I got the great idea to start Googling. You know how I love all the information. And it turns out that the smell of sauerkraut or something sour is typically a sign of wood rot. Well, ladies and gentlemen, what in my craft room could possibly be rotting? How about the window that's been leaking since February? How about that? Think that could be it? Because I do. So the maintenance update, several of you guys have asked, my carpet's still not fixed. I still have seams in my family room. The window that I have reported in February that was leaking, which is the one that's in my craft room, clearly is still not fixed. And because they're awful and they push everything back 100 years, they only make the problem worse. So now I have no idea how far we are down this rabbit hole of this window rotting. I've also noticed that because they did not caulk the shower encasement, part of the drywall in there is starting to kind of collapse in on itself, and there's a weird random stain that's like grayish black on my linoleum by the bathtub and then by the toilet. So my guess is something's probably leaking under there as well. Now, I've reported all of this. The last time that they reached out to me to schedule an appointment was 2 weeks ago. They were supposed to come fix my carpet and fix my window, and then nobody showed up. Just no one showed up whatsoever. So I had previously called to complain about maintenance multiple times, but the most recent call to complain, she said, can you send me an email just kind of detailing everything that you've been through? I wrote a 3-page Word document, guys. 3-page Word document about all of the maintenance issues that have just either not been taken care of or taken so long to be taken care of. I mean, it was a joke. So in that email, wait, we have to go back to the card. So I chose to go with yellow greens and greens for my leaves. So I'm going to show you one leaf in yellow green. I'm adding shading to the center, so I'm flicking out from that center line. And then I'm also adding just little flicks of color from the outside edge in. And this is just going to give it a little bit more texture so it doesn't look super flat. And that just going, same thing I did with the flower, and pretty much that I do with everything else. Lightest to darkest, darkest back into my lightest. This particular leaf is tucked up underneath another leaf. So there would be shading where the leaf is laying on top of the second leaf. So if you watch my videos, we've talked about this before. Any point where two objects meet will be darker and have shading. any point where one object is laying on top of another object will have shading. So I tried to be pretty light-handed with the YG67, which is my darkest color, because I didn't want the entire leaf to be dark. So again, I just added those little lines that we talked about. And then once I colored all of the ones that I was going to color yellow, green in, then I kind of switched it up. So I still wanted them to be friends and look good together. So I left my base as a YG03. And then I changed all the colors that came after that. So it still had a yellow-green-ish feel at the base layer, but all of the other shading was different. Is this necessary? No. Does it add interest to your project? Yes. So I mean, typically when you see a plant or a flower arrangement, they have multiple colors of leaves or multiple types of leaves that are different colors. And so this is just something that you can do to make your floral arrangement more interesting, but I did color it exactly the same way. So anyway, while I was writing the 3-page thesis on how not to be a maintenance person, I included in there that they were supposed to be there at 10 a.m. And it was, as I was typing it, it was 1:45 and still nobody had shown up. And then so I sent that off, and the girl who apparently is in charge of this area sent me an email back and said that she was looking into it. After, I think it was a day or two, she emailed me again and said that the reason nobody showed up, are you ready for this? This is classic. On that day, the reason nobody showed up is because, quote unquote, all of his contractors quit on him. All of them. Every single one. Can you imagine? Just a mass walkout. Every single person quits in the same day. I mean, my word, what a terrible Saturday. I cannot believe that happened to that gentleman. I don't buy that. Not for one hot second. Anyway, back to the card. So I did not like my original idea. I told you that. So I decided that I was going to fussy cut them out. I was just going to trim them out. It was going to be the easiest way to get what I wanted. And I had spent so long coloring them, I certainly wasn't just going to let it go. So after they were all trimmed out, which they kind of remind me, I don't know if you crafted back then, but like back in the day, we used to have like these really pretty pattern papers, and then you would just cut out sections of the pattern paper to use. That's kind of what it reminded me of. So because the arrangement had changed, because my game plan changed on how my card was going to go, this is that stitched ironworks background you can see there, and then I've also die cut out the flat diamond shape that I can't remember what it's called. Now I'm cutting the flowers apart, just kind of messing around and seeing how am I going to make this work, that I've spent hours coloring these roses, and that they are going on a card for sure. 110% they're going on a card. So what I ended up finding was this glitter paper. You guys know I've kind of been obsessed with glitter paper lately. That was almost the same shade of purple. So what I did was flip it over, because you can't draw on the front. Obviously it's got the glitter on it. So I flipped it over and I traced the outside edge of my die with a pencil, because this is going to be slightly larger than the die cut, because the die cut edge is set to the inside. You can trace pretty much any die, and the outside, it will give you a little bit of a border. So back in the day, here we go. Back in the day, we used to just border everything. Everything would have layers upon layers upon layers. I would have a photo in a scrapbook that was surrounded by 4 different layers. And so I decided that that little bit of purple would kind of break up the white, and I really liked that. So I had to change from my original sentiment because it just didn't fit with the flowers. The flowers were too big. So I'm using WPlus9 black dye ink to stamp my sentiment. And these are all just super encouraging sentiments, which I love. So I did combine 2 of them. The first part of it says, when one journey ends, another begins. And then the second part of it says, you've got this. Because I think we all need a little bit of encouragement when we're trying something new, right? I did use the I stamped like a little purple heart so that that would match and kind of fill in that space. And then I'm going to add my flowers. I added my flowers with foam tape. So this little one is just there for placement purposes, so I know where to stick down my bigger flower, because I want it to frame my sentiment, but I don't want it to cover up any part of my sentiment. And then also I didn't want my leaves or my flowers hanging off of my card. So it was kind of a tricky thing to get the placement right. And then I just tucked in the other flower underneath it, you know, from where I cut it apart so that everything would you know, fit in there nicely. And then I did the same thing to the bottom. The last thing that I did was I used some these are Nuvo drops. They're, I think, the jewel ones, so they're kind of iridescent, and I used the purple, even though the purple isn't like purple, but it was a really nice addition to kind of just draw attention to that sentiment. And then I covered everything with glitter, because glitter. And then that was it. That's the whole card. So thank you guys so much for joining me. I appreciate that, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.